Okay, welcome everyone to the second part of our lecture 10 today, Software as a Service. As we learned, a very interesting field because it offers massively revenue streams to software companies today. I think CPP games, you have this here even in Iceland, up to CRM markets, which are really customer relationship management tools, which offering a lot of functionalities and cross-selling strategies for companies today that were basically impossible to think of 15 or 10 years ago. So by seamlessly integrating now also into social media accounts, having, basically the personal life sometimes exposed completely when you're not really careful with your security options, then of course, all data can be automatically analyzed for business concerns to, learn basically from this person's. And sometimes it's more done in a cohort, so the people would be not maybe interested in you alone. They would say it's a man between 35 and 50. They put you in several classes because this is still targeted marketing, right? Maybe the extreme personalization is not happening, but definitively it all adds up to get more information about people that are 35 to 50 in an age group. And of course, you can do the same with male, female, kid, etc. So I think for these reasons, we also have to think every time about this data protection rules I will allude to in the second half. I will also think about a little bit the dominance that we have right now about Amazon, Google, academic institutions more and more have basically declarations, not really rules, but declarations in place that please don't use these services, use the ones for researchers. That's why I basically will shed light also why, let's say, at least in the open source and academic and in the researcher areas, we basically encourage not to use these resources. And of course, Amazon, Microsoft, and others have an interest to basically still try to really have academic people on the cloud because they know we basically train you for the market that is out there. So in a way, you cannot say it's also bad from them. So of course, we should also support that as a university. But when you consider that all basically knowledge, data is uploaded to the cloud, you also have to think about for what it is used, it is analyzed. I don't want to make you too much fear. There are lots of more legal frameworks around which really are into force, at least in EU and the EEA, which Iceland belongs to. So we are relatively good protected there. But of course, as soon as you move across national boundaries, you have a concern. And this is something, what is the idea of the second part of the lecture, to think a little bit about advanced topics of this SaaS model, right? It is a very nice global market, but still we have our national rules. And also what there is we have different ways how we really think about business cases, how we go to different businesses and so forth. So I start with this interesting idea of Zoho again that started once as a, let's say, interesting CRM, custom relationship management software. And I myself using it, but I'm not working there, just saying that's why I've seen it growing up. And now by interesting comparisons over the last years, you see how more and more business sectors they enter. So you see this very nice if you go here to the left-hand side, a so-called Zoho store, where you now can also have, let's say, business intelligence. You have the social, which means also social media hooks, right? So you can, with one click, look in all the social media profiles if, of course, your security settings are put up like this. But chances are today that actually this is often so much changed from Facebook, Instagram, and all of these providers that you still get reasonable information about a public profile on Facebook. So, and this is of course here used, also automated, and then put into an interesting, let's say, connection UI, which enables you with one click essentially see everything what you need to know. And then you buy another product tier in the cross-selling fashion, which directly gives you all the power of AI. And it goes on, it goes on. You can go deeper, documents, chatting. So having, instead of a Skype, of course, you won't have a Zoho chat with all your colleagues that using basically Zoho in your company. So you have a, let's say, chat. You have basically even the possibility to connect to human resources. So if you have, of course, a company, immediately you have several human resources concerns you have to think about, not only the gender aspects in it maybe, but also hiring. You have lots of different aspects, so you can easily suddenly connect to this and also buy this module. And I think here on the bottom, you see also very, of course, clear argument that all of you have maybe used with me here Zoom, but I use around 12 to 15 different services, from, you know, go-to meetings up to Big Blue Button and Blue Jeans. They are all fancy names. But the interesting thing is, of course, it's a business now for everyone in this business as well. So they provide you with a Zoho meeting capability, right? With an events module that you can buy, and Showtime. And of course, Click is then again more collaborating. And of course, they can now have that as a really nice bundle, so to speak, to have this as a remote sales office, because now in COVID-19, they can quickly react to the crisis and say, we have specific tools for you, don't want to, you know, take advantage of them by buying this or that different modules. And of course, this is a very nice way how you react quickly to a market which is completely drastically changing, like we actually now see in the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Without any face-to-face meeting, you just need these meeting tools, and by orders of magnitude. And we have seen, especially in the first wave, that many of those had really challenges in scaling up to so many users suddenly. And of course, there's now a market that everybody can do some cross-selling and have already quite established, you know, platform as a service clouds or infrastructure as a service clouds underneath. So all they need to have to do is essentially just creating then a meeting service, because the infrastructure underneath is already scalable to lots of customers and so on. So of course, this is something which we see happening not only here in the COVID crisis, also for many different aspects. And while saying this is, of course, a really big business opportunity, which is, of course, contributing to lots of revenues and creating also lots of jobs. Let not forget this, right? People that work at Zoho, they have lots of events from the developers showing the people new elements on the product and so forth. But the other side of the story is, of course, that you're more and more dependent on these companies in every part of your life, really, right? Even if it comes to your private life, you maybe use Zoom to actually have your grandparents, you know, talk to or something like this, because you cannot visit them anymore. Or if you visit them, they're in a, you know, a huge risk factor of getting COVID and then basically maybe even die. So in this sense, these should be all taken a little bit also with a certain reservation, especially if you think that we are an independent university lecture, we can shed light on this. And although I cannot go in all the different details of security, of law details, because I'm not a security specialist nor a lawyer, I want just to make you aware of this. I think many of you are, and one idea of this GDPR that I will touch on in a moment is that you are giving your consent, that you're always informed, making informed decisions of where you put your data, how people may use your data again, and things like that. But it's often overlooked. That's why I want to just tell it. And let alone this law elements in it, of course, we have also technical problems, right? You know, many of you probably the denial of service attacks that some have, or just the hacking that several times takes place. Of course, it's technology. If you give your data there, some know, for instance, the Garmin watches, right? This is a huge incident where people, I think Russian hackers wanted to have money from them. And Garmin was, of course, with the watches everywhere in the market. So there are lots of customer data that was exposed there to a company that, of course, then could target Garmin to get, you know, the desired money. And you see, these things are really existing. They are not always in the main mass media because, of course, it's also on the company's interest to shed as little light of it as possible. But these things are happening. And these are happening through denial of service attacks, and lots of different problems of decreasing the quality of service. You have intrusion in systems, and, you know, trust issues, starting even with phishing emails saying your bank account needs a new, you know, password and things like that. Just saying again, you know, making you aware of cloud security, because this is not a security course or network security course. I leave it at this level. Right? But you can think about that every key function you have on the left side here, which a little bit shed light on the EAAS, PAAS, and SAAS models, every one on these levels has a different security implications that in one way or another are a risk. And of course, companies like Amazon, they have a huge reputation not to be, you know, hacked and not to do this. On the other hand, if you are infrastructure as a service, you are the infrastructure manager, then of course it's about you. renting the service to not let it happen. And then Amazon, of course, can quickly say, well, you're the administrator of the infrastructure you rent from us. So it's your problem if you expose a password everywhere. So things like that, of course, are now also a key problem that in this sense, you have to be always aware where are responsibilities in this, cloud security. And it's a huge field, and where even I think law can just rarely really follow suit, because if you think now I can sue so many people about this or that thing, you have to see that also law is built on traditional law, and traditional law never had maybe so many incidents in this particular IT part. So we see also more and more that law has to actually get into pace with the cloud giants to get to the same, let's say, trust levels we had maybe 10 years ago, when it was about software and hacking and copying of malware and all of these. So by the clouds and the amazing pace they have, the law is just stepping one step at the time, and of course creates huge costs for companies. And that's why we see there more and more a gap in lots of different elements where you don't even know in which situation you are, right? Right, now I talk to you about cloud security. Another factor of this is, of course, very clear the national boundaries. And this is speaking in a global market. Luckily, very luckily for us here in Europe and the European Economic Area, you have things like the EU, you have EFTA, basically for Iceland, and the EFTA countries, Switzerland and Norway, and basically also Liechtenstein. And they basically are together with the EU in this general data protection regulation. So all what I said now about consent, so basically you're reusing your data, is not that simple anymore. You have to have an informed consent given to this or that company that your data is reused, it resides in the cloud. They cannot just use it. Of course, they are very smart. They put essentially in the use of terms that you click, let's say in a second, lots of documents. If you want, do the exercise before you enroll in Amazon Web Services or any other cloud, do the exercise and just scroll through the terms, right? When you sign up for it, you will see lots of interesting examples where they try to, of course, say, well, this data is used for personal marketing reasons or things like that. So you are informed about this, so it's GDPR conform, but who of us is really reading line by line of these terms? So of course, that's now basically shifting to us as a problem, right? So we have to, of course, be also much more strict several times, review our Facebook profiles. They are changing every now and then in terms of security policy. So suddenly what was not exposed is exposed. But do you want to have your pictures seen by a recruiter where you maybe drink a little bit too much beer in front of some interesting bar in Reykjavik downtown? So you can imagine it's a huge debate in terms of law. But the good news is, I think in EU and EEA, we are relatively good in this. The trouble starts when you go out of the EFTA country, out of the EEA countries and EU countries. So there have been long debates, and some of you maybe know the Patriot Act debate, that every US government can always look also in clouds which are used by European people or citizens, because they use US clouds. So the US government can always look in maybe for criminal investigations or for different purposes, and you have no right whatsoever to prevent that. So in order to prevent that, of course, the EU started activities, and this was really huge debates going on until today, more or less, to really create the safe harbor of data, which is somewhat related with the GDPR, and just saying essentially you have this privacy principles that it should be not that easy to really go to your personal information when you store it in this cloud. But this was actually not coming through the decision bodies in some point in time. So you see how much also lobby and how much law activities are there from those that benefit from that to get all your, let's say, personal information. Of course, it's a huge market. Think about personal targeting marketing up to criminal investigations. Of course, the government is also interested in what you do in terms of taxes in this country and that country, and so forth. Of course, here and there are big companies that we will look at, like Google, for instance. They have Google AdSense and Google AdWords, where you can actually make money with basically essentially saying just putting some marketing on your own website that may be highly frequently visited, so you get some good revenues. But Google also, of course, is working then with government, so to speak, and just allowing one Google account to be used with AdSense and AdWords, and you have to give your tax number, so that you not create, let's say, an AdWords account in every country and then suddenly have revenues from every country and it's not taxed. So you see that, of course, the large players here, they are aware of this, and because they have a huge reputation, they're not going to lose it. They work on it. But you see here and there, we find loopholes in all of that, which is, of course, a very important part in it. We look into Google AdSense and AdWords in a later lecture when it's about social media and all of these interesting ad business behind it. And I just shed light here again of an interesting security concern. Because I'm, as I said, not a lawyer, so some of these things are moving also quickly, that you could see there perhaps several rules which are, can be done. I just want to again make you here aware of that we are partly safe when you ask about GDPR, but we're not really completely safe as soon as we move out of the GDPR space, which is America, China, Russia, and all over the world. Some interesting features I just put here essentially to be, how to say, to be a bit more comprehensive in saying what was, of course, huge development in the SaaS world. And I think by now everybody of you knows that very well. You have seen Word transformed from a very interesting DOS-like feature, which was a little bit better than writing text somewhere in a text editor, to move up into a cloud service which now can be collaboratively edited with 2 users at the same time. You write the text, you send the email to another one who is not even on board of this. You wait for the reply, you can already work further on the document, and when you receive the comments, you can quickly integrate the comments because it's also connected to the cloud. It's scalable. You can have not 2 users, you can have 10 users suddenly looking on the document. You don't have to send 10 emails. You send 1 email with a link to Google Docs, to Word, online, when you have 365-degree. So long story short, it goes up even to messengers, right? In Zoho, everybody in your company can now actually having their private messenger, not like Skype or the open ones that are out there like Slack chats, more private company buy. And this brings now interesting new functionality that all of you can and basically use today, I think, already, perhaps much more as we older generations, you as students, you basically lived up with this. I still had actually systems where not was Microsoft Windows on board or Mac or anything or Linux at that time, right? So you had just DOS, an operating system, which was really interesting to use, let's put it this way, while today you see really how all of these interesting things can come together and work together. So exciting time. We look into this a little bit more in the technical details when we talk about online social networking and also the data structures that serve all that behind it, right? Online content networks like Netflix and so forth. Also, the example of Office is a key example of itself. Even if you're not maybe the big Microsoft fan, I understand that, but you have to appreciate what walk that was in the last 20 years for that company. Basically going from this small Microsoft first operating system to now the biggest maybe Office suite that is available 24/7 in a cloud structure, SaaS with 365. And you see all the apps we use today, right? Here on the right-hand side, from your storage in OneDrive and replication schemes for your backups, up to presentations in your university courses, or forms you use for pulling and information, surveys, and so forth. You have Teams, which is something like Zoom, right? You can just have small Teams meeting. Lots of these things show you also not that basically the SaaS gives you lots of opportunity, also that many uses cross-selling idea. Now, basically everybody goes into different streams of the market, and what you can do with SaaS very, very easily than in previous, let's say, decades. Again, also the Office 365, here's an example how I and Matthias Burg, for instance, write a proposal together, right? Another professor at our university, and we can do so very nicely, even on the same paragraph. We write text together, which makes it, of course, much more faster. Think about the different nations and time zones. We write proposals sometimes together with the US, right? That means we in Europe work, when we go to sleep, America works on the proposal, and actually when they are done, we're looking on their contributions and then can further work on our parts. So you have a 24/7 suddenly where you work on the proposal. And this is just examples, of course, now for writing, for the academic trick. Think about, businesses can exploit this on many different, levels, also in marketing and wherever it is, in support, maintenance, and so forth. Another good example that I think everybody of you know, that's why I just very briefly talk about it, is of course Google Doc, Google Drive, Google Mail. I think almost all of us in one way or another using it. There may be really rare exceptions that go around of using that today. Particularly Gmail is, I think, very prominent, but also the Google Docs for sure. And these are, of course, services which Google really, in this workspace approach, and by having more and more services in almost every different, let's say, branch on business, is really interesting. And of course, you always think about a Google account is free. So what is a business model behind Google, right? So you think about when they offer you lots of OneDrive storage for free, Google Docs for free to use, and Gmail for free. I mean, at some point in time, the volume counts up, and of course, there are payment fees. But what could be behind all of this? Of course, they analyze data here and there. But one good example is when you look, for instance, on the Google Maps, you would think I use it even maybe for navigation for free, right? And immediately you would think this is a stupid company, right? Because they gather a lot of data, they have a lot of data, and they don't earn money. And if you look on the insights, what we will also do in lecture 14, together then with the ad business, as I said, with AdSense and AdWords and the money flow behind it, there you see they make lots of money about it. And they live from contributions also here and there from the community. If you think about that, Google Maps can be edited and so on. There's an OpenStreetMaps that almost nobody really uses. Let's say there is some kind of a user community for OpenStreetMaps, that's for sure. But still, that's of course here where really ad business comes also interesting for contributors of companies that really want up-to-date information in Google Maps, because people are really using it on a daily basis, and that's how I get customers. So, and of course here on a very interesting way, enriched with more and more information. In a very usability fashion way, I can click on it, I can zoom in, I can actually also have ratings. Right, ratings is a very interesting work we shed light on when we think about data mining in lecture 11 and practical lecture 11.1. So we will talk about the ratings, which are important for machine learning, data mining, and so on. So these are all interesting businesses, which in the first slide you would think are not existing, but behind the scene offer lots of possibilities. And other possibilities which would be probably unthinkable, let's say 15 years ago, would be the niche markets. So let's say more niche market products where you would think this is not someone when you go downtown he regularly use, so we don't put really for contract management the software out there basically downtown, because only 1 in maybe 100 people needs such a software. Which is admittedly true, right? We are not all using something like this, like Google Maps or Google Docs or something like this. But however, the SaaS model allows you to be really targeted in a niche market. So here's a very good example of Conga, which has different branches. And one of it is Conga Novatus, which is online contract management and things like that, which is basically the whole aspect of legal contract lifecycle. But this was something which is very easy for this company to do in a very much niche market, because also you don't have exactly so much cost. You create the software, okay, and you have to maintain it, but all the kind of main business with having your clouds already for other parts of the business ready for scale up is already there. So basically you can have this as a niche market, even if it doesn't give you major revenue. As you're basically serving a niche market, chances are that also there are less competitors. People talk about the red market and the blue market, right? In terms of where you go with products. If you go now and create, let's say, a Google Docs competitor, good luck, right? Please do it with the scalability. Even Microsoft, saying this from practical experience, also together used with Matthias' book heavily in this, online writing of proposals. Even Microsoft with this power cannot go to the power of Google Docs in writing and editing, right? We feel differences in usabilities, especially if you have in the same paragraph text. It basically works, but Google is still quite far in this. And if you shop or off, so to speak, and create your own Google Docs again, and you see that's a market you possibly not can win. But if you go to a niche market where possibly are just one or two player yet, there's a chance that you maybe just much more have a chance to, have and position a product which people actually use, and you get your revenues for it. Another niche market I want to shed light on is the engineering. So engineering and cloud have always a very interesting relationship, which isn't really romantic. So I know even many engineers that don't like Jupyter notebooks because they're too much UI, right? Too much user interface. I want to have my systems there, my engineering systems. For instance, computer-aided engineering, if you create a car here, as an example. There's Altair engineering, but many others doing this, computer-aided engineering. This is just one example. And they can also benefit and basically enroll to a program that also Amazon particularly put out for those which are, partner networks. And of course, in this way, you kind of directly have a partner which is quite strong and can actually then achieve lots of interesting things with you. And here, this is just a very niche market, those people that use computer-aided engineering tools, right? Again, you wouldn't go downtown to get your CAE, program, and lots of people and engineers using it and can actually build on the benefits again from having distributed geographical teams using it. You have the scalability and so forth. We talk about this computer-aided engineering and computational fluid dynamics and all of that, what's behind this, much more technically in the high-performance computing course, but it requires a lot of computing, especially if you do aircraft design, auto design, or automobile designs. So they also need the cloud, but it's interesting to see teaming up with, let's say, such a giant. And sometimes there's a niche market that I want to put here with UberCloud. So UberCloud is a company also here a little bit in Iceland, actually working together with the Advania data centers. And they have a very niche, interesting technology they push, which is quite fascinating. It's called the UberCloud containers. And this has a very nice idea of putting this cloud for engineering, what essentially UberCloud is, and preparing this already as containers, because these people that doing this computer-aided engineering, they don't want to work on installing that, on making it scalable on Amazon or on Google Cloud, wherever. So they just want to use that. On the other hand, of course, they don't want to be trapped to a vendor, right? We call vendor lock this, right? When we say we have now installed everything on Microsoft Azure, and now we have problems to go to Amazon Web Services because it's all changing. So then the kind of niche market, although containers are growing, of course, in significance, is that it's firstly the engineering area, which is not the major use like CRM markets, for instance, customer relationship management. Still, it's a quite interesting user community with lots of money. If you think about the airline industry creating new, designs of aircraft, or the automobile industry, for instance. And here's the idea that you see a little bit in this UberCloud container. You have all these interesting packages that I also actually tell much more about OpenForm and ANSYS in my HPC course. And some of you maybe even know MATLAB and so on. And COMSOL is also a very known package. So essentially, we have here a good idea of having pre-installed container images and setups that run on Kubernetes, Docker, tools we will actually explore in lecture 12 together. And we'll come back to this also, how it exactly works. But the beauty on it is not only it's all pre-packaged for users, so they can directly start using it, they are also working a little bit against this vendor lock. So you have Amazon Web Services supporting these, but you can also shift it over to Advania, could shift it over to Microsoft Azure, because in a way it's establishing itself a little bit as a standard, but we would call it rather a de facto standard. Just one example of many, but another interesting niche market where companies find their way in the cloud of making a business model. Now at the end, basically towards the end of the lecture, and having also said something about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and have, I hope, now put all in your heads that clouds actually cost a lot. I also want to shed light on free alternatives. Of course, these alternatives come with certain constraints. If you are a company, it's relatively hard using them partly. That's not completely true. There are usage models, but all of them are, let's say, not still completely sorted out. For instance, there's still a debate of how much, commercial companies can really use our HPC machines, which are more or less paid by the taxpayer, right? So in a sense, you have there a conflict of interest and people looking into models using that more, and let's say bridging the worlds between academics in universities and research centers, and of course, startup companies, which are often emerging from academics, and then suddenly are in this gray zone of saying, can I still use the academic resources because I'm just a startup, just starting? Or basically, am I already a small, medium enterprise, so to speak, that is a typical company and is basically a profit company. And this is all mostly where it falls back to. You have non-profit and profit companies. So as you see, there's some debate, and usually what I experience in the last 10 years, you get reasonable deals, at least for the beginning. If people see that you do a lot of money, people will start asking, don't you want to contribute to some fee or some, let's say, membership fee, whatever it is, the cost model you have. Usually this application enabling time, so getting your application, using the service in the beginning, getting a feel for it, is something which essentially is for free, and then you basically can make a deal with several providers. But not always is everything very clear, and that's why there's still lots of legal frameworks necessary actually for this to do this. Luckily, that's undertaken. I know examples, for instance, in the EuroHPC joint undertaking where exactly these questions are addressed. I'm governing board member for Iceland in the EuroHPC governing board, and we discuss these issues. So what happens if a company wants to use our academic HPC resources we have in Iceland or Germany or in the world? So the good news is that's discussed, and I think then there will be legal frameworks dealing with this, and then also, of course, cost elements, more transparency, what it means for companies. But coming a little bit back now to the researchers here, and some of you maybe will engage in a journey for essentially doing a PhD degree. And when you now think about you want to do a PhD in deep learning and have seen all the costs I presented you, then you're quite of demotivated. Then you would say, where should I get, lots of thousands of money? Or my professor has thousands of money to actually rent an Amazon GPUs that I can use for deep learning in my studies. So the good news is that's, of course, well understood. And GPUs is really just one example where you have to think about. We have touched on the European Open Science Cloud, which is really a massive endeavor in the whole EU, funded significantly with many different projects, and I cannot just go through all of them. I will basically show you a little bit something about EOSC-Hub, and then also mentioning EOS Nordic because we're here in Iceland and we are part of this project. But this has lots of things also, not only to compute to be thinking of, it's also lots of other areas. What happens to my data that I publish? In the future, we have to have open data. So others that look at your publication, they want to know the data that gave rise to it. They want to know the scripts you used. They want to actually share this data, maybe the scripts, with other researchers to get, feedback. They want to do some, of course, data management with it. They want to have some, let's say, replication schemes, something similar like we have learned from MapReduce, replication. So in case, I'm losing my hard disk, of course, I want to make sure that the data for my publication is still somewhere secured. And having this in the academic area is not that easy because you operate, of course, not as one big company. We operate under national, basically legal frameworks. We operate under even sometimes organizational legal frameworks. And so with this, also the usability is constrained. Some people allow group accounts, some other countries not. So these are just examples, and the idea here is today to think about that this EOSC is really pushing to a world where data is so-called fair. FAIR stands for data that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is really a big drive these days, and we see more and more projects have to create a data management plan and also show how they make their data fair. And this is, of course, related to the point that in the way many of those projects get taxpayers' money. So why it should be private capital that you get out of this, you have to give something back. And the data that you give out or the results of the project that you give out, can someone else in Europe maybe take to create a spin-off or basically a startup out of the company. So this is, of course, something which is now really put in almost every pieces if you live in academic life, whether it's computing, whether it's storage, whether it's publishing, whether it's teaching. It's also in teaching discussed that, of course, teaching material should be more open, right? And this is also an interesting aspect of it. So wherever you go, you have important aspects around storage and sharing. And I just picked here a couple of services which nicely play together. Also because I personally was involved creating those when I was part of the UDAT project. But now these projects are taken up by the European Open Science Cloud as services for researchers in the European area and European Economic Area for free to use. And you will see different flavors of how you now think about data. Right? It's a big data course as well as a cloud computing course. And this cloud also is a little bit more thinking about what's happening with data and the data lifecycle. If you are a researcher, but you will see many of these lifecycle aspects are actually the same in companies. And we find equivalence of the services, of course, in the business space. So the first service I think is relevant here to understand for you is basically the B2 Find service. That's a metadata harvester, if you want. So in the way you discover different repositories of data, right? So this is important to think about, that there's data everywhere. Every scientific domain has data. And basically somewhere available. How do we find it? It's trapped somewhere in domain repositories, and with a certain metadata scheme, not only Dublin Core, which is a core metadata standard, there are different scientific community-specific metadata schemes you can basically put into this, and with a specific harvesting protocol, which would go too much into techniques, this B2Find service is able to actually track this metadata and make these services and the repositories underneath much more findable in Europe. So that's a B2Find service, which is key essential. It's not saying we have to duplicate all of this basically now in all your, let's say, different repositories. You don't want to copy data array, right? It's just about finding them. Another one is something you see with just sharing quickly data, a Dropbox for science and engineering. Everybody knows Dropbox, I guess. So if you just want to quickly share results from research project, you have a very nice run. You heard Rocco, he was experimenting with deep speed instead of Horowat for deep learning and found it's an order of magnitudes faster. So you put that to Dropbox, it's somewhere in a commercial space. And here is, of course, the equivalent that you have a scientific academic run service, which no commercial interest. So he basically can put these things in a neutral space and share it with several researchers very quickly. And of course, without buying a subscription of, let's say, as you have to do with Dropbox. Then it goes on. This B2Share, you're even more into the sharing, but having a key unique selling proposition, you would get a handle. A handle is something that almost all probably know by now. It's a persistent identifier for your data sets. Basically, wherever you go, when the position change, you put it from Amazon to maybe then in Azure or to some University of Iceland repository or to Jülich in the supercomputing center, wherever you put the data, the handle remains the same. So you have here a way of putting it maybe in documents like papers, publications, while the underlying handle system, as it is called, will basically automatically make sure that the geographical real location will be not exposed and can be always linked back to this handle. And this is, of course, a beautiful idea when you think about more publishing your research data and sharing it with, let's say, research which is already a little bit more in a published state. Then when you think about what you normally phase is you have your hard disk. It's somewhere in a community repository. If you are a biologist, if you are a chemist, what happens if this maybe falls down sometime? You spent the last 10 years of your life creating all this data. Where can you put it? And if you put it, is it just in one data center? And if this data center by chance really has an earthquake or something happening, what happens then? In the sense you see here that this system B2Safe is doing automatically data replication around European centers. And this, of course, helps us tremendously. If one of the centers in Europe will go down for whatever reason, could be terror attacks up to natural disasters, we always would have still the scientific data in one of the sites available. And that all 3 or 4 sites will go down is extremely unlikely. That's why, of course, this is a very nice service that you can, of course, also use for free, which is quite interesting. If you think about it, how much you would pay now, again, going to Amazon, then storing the same data maybe in Azure and storing the same data in the Google Cloud Platform. Finally, we have the B2Stage system here, the B2Stage service, which you can consider as a more bigger idea of transferring terabytes or gigabytes of data. Some measurement devices you have heard from Rocco, his data sets he's sometimes analyzing are quite large. Also, if you think about future measurements from new satellites that come in and do remote sensing of the Earth, we have different hyperspectral channels. And of course, the satellites go there 24/7 around the Earth. So collecting data in a ever better quality than ever seen before. And when we want to exchange this with researchers, we need good paradigms of just copying this. I cannot, just send this as an email attachment. That wouldn't work. So you need also services which are optimized to really stage data from one cloud to another, or basically from one computing center to another, which is also part of this EOSC services landscape. I didn't talk very much about the AAI, which is all enabling this. So authentication, authorization of users in the European era, which is essentially already what you know is EduRoam. Essentially at EduRoam, you already have the chance at entering a network of trust by just having your university ID, no matter where you go. In UK, everywhere, in Germany, with EduRoam, chances are you just have their Wi-Fi in an academic institution that you can access. In a similar fashion, you have to think about that these services can be accessed in order to get all the different services which have different purposes about identity, the integrity of the service, having a persistent identifier. And then, of course, having authenticity, that the data is still there, that you can work with all the different locations, but still having all this persistent identifier helping you of identifying really is this data. And it helps you also sometimes to delete data, right? If you have gigabytes of data and you make a copy and again and again and again to analyze, at some point in time you want to make sure, and if you have a PID, you are sure that somewhere really is stored in a proper version. So you can nicely delete it on your, let's say, local hard drive because you're sure there's a PID somewhere in the cloud. Admittedly, this was very much researcher oriented, right? So this is clear. With this, basically, this is something which not everybody of you will probably use when you go to the job market. But those of you that are in science have chances to, in one way or another, have some of these services, maybe from another academic provider, touched upon, like you do with EduRoam in the future. And many of us, we already actively use this. If you go to B2Share, you will find entries from Gabrielle and me putting SVM runs, support vector machine runs on multispectral data sets, which were maybe quite some time ago. So you have all the runs from our HPC runs there. So, and this is open for everyone. So everybody can reproduce, which is a big word in this, reproducibility of science and engineering results, can reproduce this, understand it better, and then tune it to its needs. So to finish the EOSC area, and the fair and all of this, just give you a hint, because many of you are here from Iceland, you're somewhere related also in the Nordic countries. You see that we have also a EOSC Nordic project where we're in, where lots of activities are happening around these services we just discussed, like B2Find, for example, but also really interesting training happening, because not everybody knows in science and engineering what does it mean to have fair data. Right? So there are lots of workshops, presentations, as you see as an example here, documents to really help researchers to go more fair in the Nordic region here, just as a pointer for you for this project, and also explaining one of the logos that you always see in front of my lecture series. So to finish the lecture, basically today, I want to just give you some reflections, right? Think about SaaS without internet. Not much happening, huh? So this is, of course, the biggest problem, right? You have to have always a perfect internet connection, and the more services are there, you need a better and better internet connection because you transfer more and more elements of data on functionalities. What about a service as a software substitute? So basically, if you think about a violation of these principles of this free software, we have the open source drive. Everything is open source, some people say, right? Free software is the way to go. With SaaS, we're moving completely in a different direction. It's a complete black box. You cannot knock and say, Zoho, please give me all your code. I want to have something similar built tomorrow. They would say bye-bye, right? So everything we do now in this movement towards SaaS sounds very good, but it's also a black box. And you never know what's really happening. And this goes in line with all the legal aspects I told you about data protection and so forth. And of course, with this, you enter a big can of worms. Who is actually owning this data once this company goes bankrupt, right? You have a data login. You cannot just move and migrate quickly. Docker and containers are working against this, but we're still not there yet. Not every cloud provider is offering this. Zoho has no interest of losing his customer to Salesforce or to Freshworks, right? Why they should do this? They earn money from you. So why having a migration option? You have to think about this. This data escrow topic is, of course, large. It also leaves our field here in technology, of course, having, again, legal aspects. That's why I don't talk about this now much more again. Finally, just think about that these systems are always 24/7 out there. Think about the Garmin watches, right? Used every day by us, gathering a lot of data, and then Garmin is hacked, right? Something what Garmin actually is not really responsible for in a way, right? They are a proper company. And this happens. And now the question is how we can make that better, how we can make it more secure. Having SaaS systems means you're always out there. You cannot create a private cloud with SaaS. It doesn't make sense. Only within your small little company maybe, but you wouldn't go for the private model. You always have a public cloud model. And with this, you have to protect yourself against any data loss or basically any criminal activity. Just to give you some reflections on what I just did in this lecture, here's a very nice summary in my mind that is about the European Open Science Cloud. If you want to understand it a little bit more, some of you are here also from different faculties. If you don't know how to store data, please contact us. We are also responsible here in the University of Iceland for really moving towards FAIR and the EOSC model. And that's all what I wanted to tell you now in this lecture. And it's a huge topic. If you're interested, please look in the internet.